South Africa has asked the World Trade Organization to set up two panels to adjudicate disputes over its citrus fruit exports to the European Union. South Africa is the world's second biggest citrus exporter. Now, South Africa disagrees with EU measures taken against its exports to combat the incidence of citrus black spot, which is a fungal disease. The disease spreads the false codling moth, which damages the fruit. The country maintains that citrus black spots cause blemishes on the fruit skin, but they don't affect its quality. In response, the European Union has meanwhile expressed regret at South Africa's decision to pursue panel proceedings in the two cases, but maintained that its pest control measures are entirely justified. We speak now to Citrus Growers Association of South Africa's CEO, Justin Chadwick, for more. A very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. South Africa's essentially picked a fight with its biggest trading partner. What exactly is the bone of contention?
Yeah, good evening, and thanks for having me on the show. I think it's not a case of picking a fight. It's not an aggressive action at all. The WTO has these dispute resolution mechanisms available to governments to sort out any trade disputes, and basically that is what South Africa is now doing. Obviously, it's a government-to-government action, so the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition went to the dispute settlement body and indicated that we have a dispute over citrus black spot and false codling moth, as you mentioned in your introduction.
Yeah.
And basically, both countries do not agree in terms of the science behind these two pests.
So this request by South Africa is its first under the WTO's dispute settlement system, but the dispute in itself is not new. Talk to us a little bit about when this was brought to light and what the discussion was at the time.
Yeah, so there are two different pests. The first one, as you mentioned, citrus black spot, has been an issue for a very long time now. I think it was back in 1994 that the EU decided that citrus black spot was a quarantine pest. At that stage, they didn't do what's called a pest risk assessment to ascertain actually that it was a risk. South African scientists and the South African government have always maintained that it is no risk to the EU, in that the fruit is not a pathway. In other words, the fungus, which is a citrus black spot, will not be transmitted and established in orchards in Europe through the fruit. We sell fruit. We don't sell twigs or leaves, etc. In terms of false codling moth, it's a bit more recent. In 2018, it was deemed a quarantine pest by the EU, and new measures were brought into place in 2018. The industry has for many years been requesting the government to take this matter to the dispute settlement body in the WTO, because it is very clear that the two parties are completely at odds in terms of the science.
The European Union has, in the meanwhile, expressed some level of regret on South Africa's decision to pursue these panel proceedings in the two cases. What exactly will South Africa be bringing to the table as these discussions become more intense and hopefully getting to the bottom of what is the way forward?
Yeah, so in any of these settlements or disputes, the first process is consultations. So in July 2022, Minister Patel called for consultations on false codling moth. And for the last 2 years, there have been discussions and consultations to try and find common ground and understand each other's science. In April this year, the minister once again called for consultations, this time on citrus black spot. Now, clearly one cannot carry on talking about these things while the industry carries on paying for compliance, which the compliance bill is in the order of 3.7 billion rand per annum. So that is why we've gone to the second step. So if consultations fail, then you approach the dispute settlement body and you ask them to set up panels. And that was the request that is now in the news. the 2 panels that we have requested be set up. And so basically what happens now is it's taken out of the hands of South Africa and the EU, and an independent panel of 3 experts will now decide whose science is correct.
Whose science is correct? Is that what you're saying? Because South African scientists have tested, but the WTO on the other end says they don't agree with how the measures have been put in place in South Africa. So will it essentially boil down to determining which way to sway? And should it be found that South Africa is perhaps the science is not what is according to standard, what implications would it have on the industry? How much are we talking in terms of losses?
Yeah, so it's quite a complex legal arguments that will be put forward by South Africa and obviously be responded to by the EU. So that process will unfold over the next 6 months or so. So even for this year, we won't have any resolution, and we're going to have to comply with what we see as unjustified and unnecessary measures. And as I mentioned earlier, it's really the cost of compliance that is the problem. The economics of citrus farming is not that strong at the moment, and having to pay that bill of 3.7 billion rand a year for compliance means that many farmers simply cannot export and get a return back on the farm. And in addition to that, the measures mean an immense amount of hassles in terms of if one has an interception. In other words, if a consignment gets into the EU and they find that there actually are insects in those consignments, then all of the containers that have fruit from that farm then need to be taken out of the market, and you can imagine that's a huge cost and a big problem for the exporters.
South Africa's biggest competitor is Spain. Would you say that perhaps a comparison has been made with the fruit that South Africa produces as opposed to Spain when it comes to how it should look, and perhaps what may be the influential factor on what the fruit looks like?
Yeah, I mean, the issue really is that Spain is in the northern hemisphere and we're in the southern hemisphere. I don't think I'd like to compare the quality of each of the countries. I think Spain produces good quality fruit, and in fact, that is the argument or the discussion that we've been having with our Spanish counterparts, is to say, with them number 1 in the world and in the northern hemisphere, and us number 2 in the world in the southern hemisphere, we should be working together to make sure that we have good quality fruit on the market throughout the year. And you know, it's always been certain parties in Spain that have said that South Africa competes with them and that we bring the price down or we impact on their sales, which is just totally incorrect. We've got figures to show that when we're in our season and their summer, our winter, they don't have fruit in the market, and vice versa. There's very short periods of the year during which we are both in the market. So it's not in our view, it shouldn't be seen as a competitive thing, and we should be working closely with Spain.
Yeah. How much expansion potential do you think there is within the industry when it comes to the numbers and the impact that the industry has on the economy and the potential jobs?
Yeah, so just to give you an idea, at the moment we export, or last year we exported 165 million 15-kilogram boxes. That's about 2.5 million tons. And we employ about 140,000 people on farms and in pack houses. Now, with the trees in the ground, so there's been a big expansion in terms of area under citrus over the last 10 years. And with the trees in the ground at the moment, in other words, with no more planting, we will increase that 165 million cartons up to 260 million cartons. And that'll bring in an additional 20 billion in foreign exchange earnings. We presently at about 30 billion, and it'll add another 100,000 jobs, secured jobs in the citrus industry. So there's massive growth potential in the industry. We just need to make sure we retain markets, important markets like the EU, that we gain new markets, and that our logistics systems work efficiently.
Very well. Thank you so much for your time.